In this video, we'll look at a simpler RWD grid system referred to as alternative RWD percentage, and we're looking at a more complicated layout. To begin with, we have a two-column system. The first column has 3 columns within it. Then as we narrow the viewport size, we get down to a size of 1100 px. The 3 columns in our first column go to 2 columns. And then the second column, which as we get down to 750 px, the advertisements now break to the bottom. The column then expanded to fill 100% of the row. Posts now are floating next to one another. So we'll see how this is done. Now the third column between 1100 and 650 px, it's only a single column. So we'd like to make that a double column, and we'll show how we can do that just by configuring the individual posts to float next to one another at 50%. And we'll do that with the alternative grid percentages. Well, if there's a simpler system, what's the advantage of the RWD grid system itself? So one advantage is width tracking, which is great if we have a complicated layout of successive layers of RWD grid initiated columns. We can easily lose track of general px value of a given grid unit choice. Whereas with the width tracker, it'll tell us exactly at a given grid unit percentage what the width in px units is. Now looking at this second column, its parent was activated for RWD, so it's responding to RWD. And it itself is activated for RWD so that the posts within it respond to RWD. And if we look at the settings, we see that at 750 px, the whole column itself now will occupy a new row at 100%. So it basically opens up at all widths under 750 px. And then if we look at the posts within it, we see that above 750 px, they're occupying 100%, but then below that, they're occupying at 15%. Now, because the posts are set to float, they simply spread across the parent column. And this is what we see when we look at the images. So getting back to the width tracker, for each percentage point at each breakpoint that we're choosing, it also tells us the px value of the post at that given percentage choice. Taking a look at an example of this for our advertisement post at screens up to and over 1600 px at 100% of the width available in the parent column, the size of the image will be 160. Then as the viewport screen narrows down to 1100 px at 100% choice, it'll be 110 px. And then for screen sizes at 750 px, our post set at 15% will only be 112 px. So basically they're the same size, even though we're choosing only 15% at 750. And if we chose 100%, it would be 750 px. Because that's the breakpoint, we set the parent column to 100%. As the view screen size narrows further, it goes down to 97 at 650 viewport sizes, and then 75 px at 500 view screen sizes. And at 100% it would be 500 px. If we wanted to go ahead and confirm that, we can narrow our viewport size to 1100 px, and we'll check the inspector size, and we get 109 px. And at just under 750, it's 111 px. So like this, the width tracker is pretty accurate. Now, a disadvantage of this main RWD grid system with its width tracker would be that in order for the width tracker to work, all the breakpoints would have to be consistent throughout the page, and that would include consistent with a template if it was using breakpoints as well. Whereas with the alternative RWD grid, we're free to choose whichever breakpoints we want for the particular circumstance. So each has its own advantage. So we're going to go ahead and reprogram this now using the alternative RWD percentage units. First, we don't need to initiate it in the parent column. So all the options for enabling the RWD grid in the parent column were shut off. Right now we're looking at original settings for max width that were overridden by the RWD grid mode. And we can see with the max width as it narrows, there's no compression, it just breaks as space becomes limiting. Instead of the max width mode number 1, we're going to choose the mode number 3, which is the alternative grid percent. And we're going to set the column at 80% with the 3% left margin. Now notice that there's no breakpoint to add. It'll be for all view screen widths until we add further breakpoints. At a breakpoint of 750 px, we want it to break to 100%. We put in the breakpoint in this table column, and then we put in the 100%. And then for the left and right margin, we can put in the 00. For the corresponding column, the second main column, we'll put in 10% for the initial width, and then we'll put in a 0% left margin and a 2% right margin. Remember, this is floating right, so the 2% is just to keep it off the very edge. And once again, when the viewer's viewport screen is 750 px, we want it to occupy 100% of the row. So we'll put in 750 and then 100%, 100, and then 00. There's no need to put the px in. And what we would like is that multiple advertisement images share the full row below 750 px. So we'll set them up for the alternative RWD response as well. We're going to set this post at 100% width. And down at 750 px breakpoint, we'll make it 15%. So that'll cover all widths below 750 px. So we export these settings to the other posts within the same parent column. Now for our 3 columns, we'll open up the alternative width percent for all 3 of these columns. Now at larger view screen sizes, we want the 3 columns to add up to 100%. So the total of all the margins and width settings in the 3 posts taken together should be under 100. We'll make the first column a little narrower and then the second column a little wider than the third column. So we have 2700, 3810 for the second column, and then we'll do a 3210, which is 32% of the width and a 1% left margin. And then as the viewer port screen size narrows down to 1100 px, as we saw earlier with the RWD-grid system, the third column broke off and then it occupied 50%. This time we're going to have that third column break off and occupy 100%. And at the 1100 breakpoint, the first 2 columns taken together will total 100%. And for the first column, we'll make it a 42 and a 00, and then for the second column, we'll go with the 57% width and then a 1% left margin. Then as the view screen narrows down 650 pixels, before each post occupied 100% of it. This time we'll make at 650 px, we'll make it 90% width and then a 5% left margin and a 5% right margin. And we'll do that for all 3 columns. And then when we get down to view screen width of 500, we'll make it 100% of the row for each column. Now the reason why we changed the third column between 1100 and 650 px to occupy 100% of the row, whereas before it was occupying 50%, this time we want the posts within the column to share 50% of the row. And that way they can float 2 across between the same widths that the first and second columns are floating. Post settings for the first post in the column, the third column, and we're going to go down to our third width mode. So for our post, it'll share 100% of the row space to begin with. Then at a breakpoint of 1100 px, we'll have the width share at 49%, and for the left and right margin, we'll give it a 0.5%. 2 of these across will occupy 100% of the row. So it'll reflect the double row columns of the column 1 and column 2 above. And then for 650 below, we'll make it for 100%. Whereas the parent column at 650 was 90% and 5% margins. So that's it. And now we have to double check that we are floating. It could be a left float, a right float, or a center float for each of our posts. as long as it's floating will work. And we'll go to the export options for this post. And we're going to export the alternative grid unit and width mode of this post to all the other posts within the same parent column. And we're going to check the include the nested column within the same parent column. In addition to the individual posts, there is the nested column post, which is wrapping two of those posts together. And we're going to do the same for the float setting. We're going to also check export the float setting to nested column within the same parent column option. We hit submit. And the three columns share row space together. We get to an 1100 view screen size. And now the first two columns break to two rows. Now if we go down and we look at the third column, we now see that it's occupying 100%. And it's now two of these across, each sharing 50% of parent column. Oh, and here we see our two smaller posts. And that's why we wrap these two together in the column, so they match up nicely with this long post right there. In a subsequent video, we'll look at use of masonry and how it packs loose posts together within a parent column. And then as we now still further and we get down to 650px, see that all the posts are sharing 90% of the column. And then down below at 500, all the posts are sharing 100% of the column. So if we don't need the width tracker, it's pretty quick and just as effective as the main RWD grid system.